You can't measure risk without putting in place a whole range of different metrics. You need to know what is the impact of a particular disruptive event. So how much will supply chain disruption cost? And then against that, you need to understand how much will your risk mitigation plan also cost? Because if it's more costly than the risk of actually your hub being knocked out, then you're going to go out of business.
Hello and welcome to the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US, a podcast in which we explore the mind-bending world of global supply chains, covering topics such as automation, innovation, unique identity, and more. I'm your co-host, Reid.
And I'm Liz.
And welcome to the show. Hello, and thanks for joining our show today. We have a wonderful guest. His name is John Manners-Bell, and he's the founder and CEO of Transport Intelligence. They're a consulting company that focuses in on logistics and all things supply chain. They're advisors to the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the UN, and the European Commission. They also work with a lot of global manufacturers, retailers, banks, shipping lines, and logistic providers. John has been at this for 25 years with Transportation Intelligence, but he's been in the logistics industry for over 40. He's written 8 books, he's a professor, and he's just an all-around great guy. I truly enjoyed today's conversation, and I'm confident that you will enjoy it as well. We jumped into not only logistics and supply chain efficiencies, but the challenges of balancing efficiency and resilience. And I was just thoroughly pleased to get the opportunity, along with Liz, to meet with John today. Enjoy. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Reid. Really nice to meet you all.
Yeah, likewise. We appreciate you carving out the time in your schedule today to talk with us. And I know we're going to get into a lot of different things, but before we do that, would you just take a moment and just tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've been in the industry for 40 years, which every time I sort of tell myself that, I can't believe it. But yeah, I started off in a small family freight forwarder and trucking company in the UK. Spent a lot of time in my 20s working at different logistics companies, including UPS, Supply Chain Solutions, which I rose to their marketing and PR and strategy manager for Europe. And then I started up my own consulting company, TI Insight Transport Intelligence, over, just about 25 years ago now. So just at the turn of the century, just looking at market research and analyzing some of the key trends and providing these services to companies like UPS and the DHL and all the rest. And since then, I've been sort of broadening horizons, and I've worked for the World Economic Forum and UN in terms of their supply chain and logistics functions, and started writing books. Amongst my 7th book, I think now. So on various aspects of the industry, a lot on supply chain risk, but on innovation as well and disruption, talking about supply chain ethics. And most recently, I've been writing about the sort of, I guess, the intersection between politics, economics, and supply chains. So that keeps me pretty busy. And in between times, I also lecture at universities. I'm a visiting professor. And next year, we're rolling out a supply chain risk executive education program at Bayes Business School in London. So there's enough to keep you busy.
Good grief.
A little bit.
Little bit. It's really interesting to me because we've been in supply chain for a minute, but supply chain became popular in culture, I guess, 5-ish years ago, right, with COVID. And everybody started talking about supply chain. Tell me, though, about supply chain risk. You mentioned you had a book on it, and then there's going to be education around it. Why is it a critical issue for businesses today?
That's a great question. And you're right to point out that about 5 years ago, everybody sort of started talking about supply chain. And it's probably a more complex question you might think, because we've always had these risks. There's always been threats around, geopolitical conflicts, and there's always been weather-related events, whether it's hurricanes or monsoons, for example. And, there's always been the security risks that we see in the world. So now there is the argument that a lot of those have got worse. You might say, climate change has resulted in intensive weather-related incidents, which impacts on the shipping industry, or or a cargo industry. But there's also a flip side to the coin. And that's because over the last 20, 30 years, supply chains have become less resilient. They've become more fragile. And that's what we saw really revealed by the COVID-19 pandemic. You only had to look at, well, PPE, for example. Supply chains were 100%, almost 100% dependent on China. And so consequently, when they stopped exporting PPE, then everybody went into panic. We saw during COVID, of course, the disruption on the West Coast ports when everybody spent their checks on consumer goods and just brought the whole logistics system into crisis. And since that point, companies have really been, I suppose, their view on risk has been fundamentally changed, that they need to build resilience. I mean, you can look back more over the years. I usually go back to about 2011 when there were a couple of huge incidents. There was the Japanese tsunami, which had a big impact on the global automotive industry, for example. And corporate boards started thinking, oh my goodness, we've got a supplier on the other side of the world, and maybe a small supplier, but it's just brought our production line down in Ohio or wherever it is around the world.
The Achilles heel.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So they started at that point looking, but I would say that there was a level of complacency throughout, through the 2000s, 2010s, right the way up to COVID, which Liz, you sort of highlighted there. And I think that's absolutely right. Now everybody's talking about resilience,
Yeah. So in your book, I believe it's the Supply Chain Risk Management book, you talk about the trade-offs between efficiency and resiliency. And as you kind of hinted at prior to COVID, it was efficiency. And, some folks would even call it a cost center versus a profit center. There's debates on these from different businesses. But how can businesses strike the right balance of efficiency versus resilience? Is there a formula, or is there certain things to consider and weigh?
You're absolutely right. I mean, supply chain efficiency is really focused on improving short-term financial performance of the company. And that's low inventory, just in time, all these different concepts that we've grown to know over the last 20, 30 years at all. They are all aimed at sort of improving bottom line, improving asset intensity, reducing inventory, etc. And supply chain resilience, on the other hand, is all about reducing risk, which is very different because a lot of the benefits from risk reduction aren't immediate. They won't come in the next quarter. They won't necessarily come in the next fiscal year. They may not come in the lifetime of a career of the executive who actually introduces them. And so actually, it's really difficult to get a grip on the benefits that result from supply chain resilience. But when you've got it wrong. We can probably go on to talk about some actual examples later on, but when your global logistics hub is completely knocked out by a fire or through flooding, or when your critical supplies are stuck on a ship outside Port of Long Beach,
or somebody runs into a bridge and knocks it down.
Even that, there are so many different types of risk that you need to take into account. But you can't measure risk without putting in place a whole range of different metrics. And, you need to know what is the impact of a particular disruptive event, for example. We just talked about fire at a hub or something like that. You need to actually be able to model what the impact that has on your operational performance. So how much will supply chain disruption cost? And then against that, you need to understand how much will your risk mitigation plan also cost? Because if it's more costly than the risk of actually your hub being knocked out, then you're going to go out of business. So, I mean, this is pretty crucial. It's these sort of decisions which need to be balanced against each other. And you need the financial metrics and even to be able to measure, to be able to make those sort of decisions.
This episode is brought to you by RX ERP, who offers a cloud-based ERP that automates compliance, boosts revenue, and manages pharma supply chains. And the Data Council, who helps streamline product content creation and sharing through iX1 River platform, an advanced digital asset and product information management solution. Thank you to our partners for making this episode possible. If you're interested in becoming or working with a GS1 US solution partner, please visit the link in the episode description. It reminds me a lot of picking stocks, right? I was watching a thing last night and like no one has a crystal ball, but you have to take into account all these different metrics and then measure them and then cross calibrate and refer back to other things, because at some aspects it's insurance, but if the insurance is too expensive for the replacement, then where does the trade-off? Sometimes we just, have to roll with it. And what is the probability? So it sounds like you're constantly calculating and looking at different models and building out different models based on political regions, weather patterns, unions, the list goes on.
Absolutely. You need to measure, and the data is absolutely critical to this. In the past, you really only had one way of actually mitigating that through risk mitigation inventory, for example, safety stock, But actually, that's not a particularly smart way of doing it, even though, post-COVID, everyone said, right, well, we're just going to really build up inventories again, because inventory costs huge amounts of money and it can be business critical. It can be existential to the fortunes of your company if you have too much inventory or the wrong inventory in the wrong place. Suddenly the things that we learned about, why everything was so bad in the 1970s through just-in-case manufacturing and so on, they haven't gone away suddenly. So therefore, businesses need to get smarter. They need to be more sophisticated in their approach, in the way they deal with suppliers. They diversify their supply chain base, for example. So there are lots of different ways to go about it, all of which need to be deployed rather than say, okay, well, these are the risks, these are the costs. We're going to have 50 days or 80 days worth of inventory on hand rather than 20.
That brings me to think about I was going to ask you about technology, and I was thinking supply chain technology, but there's supply chain data technology. I'm assuming that all of the different things and variables that we just talked about. Can you talk a little bit about what the technology is to increase like the visibility and agility, and then that introduce risks as well as the data around it?
Sure. I mean, supply chain visibility is absolutely critical to the industry. I mean, it's 30, 40 years worth of evolution within that particular the sector. And now the capabilities are there. Companies really don't have any excuse not to be able to have the levels of visibility which are required, which go all the way up their supply chain, all the way down their supply chain, and have full end-to-end visibility. If the capabilities aren't there, they will be coming in the next few years. And this will be absolutely critical for compliance purposes as well as commercial purposes. We're talking about legislation regarding supply chain ethics, for example, or in Europe, they're talking about in deforestation regulations. There's regulations which companies need to comply with in terms of using workers in parts of China and so on, which I'm sure you're most very well aware of. So these sort of levels of visibility can be introduced, but with them come huge amounts of risk as well. And many of those risks can be cataclysmic. Everyone talks about the ability to integrate supply chains, so you have a flow of data up and down. But with that, if you still need to have in place the security systems to prevent bad actors getting involved and spreading the viruses up or down or gaining access. What you don't want is a supply chain which you can gain access to a third-party supplier, and that gives you unfettered access throughout the supply chain. And even this year, we've seen, even for blue chip companies, in the UK, we're seeing it with Jaguar Land Rover, for example, where their operations have been brought to a complete halt, and their supply chain has also been brought to a complete halt as well, with many companies on the verge of going out of business. But earlier this year, we saw it for a big retailer, Marks and Spencer's. Access was gained to their IT systems through a third-party IT provider. And once they were in, the hackers managed to exfiltrate data. They then encrypted the retailer's systems and brought the whole of their operations to a halt. And for 46 days, they weren't able to sell anything online.
Gosh.
It cost them £300 million.
That is terrifying to me. My father was a truck driver, and he had his own home oil delivery service company back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I would go to work with him, and, we'd drive these trucks, and some were big 18-wheelers, and some were just short trucks for around cities and stuff. But I remember everything being paper-based. And even today, I still feel that there's this small, medium business. These aren't conglomerates, right? They're $1 million companies, but they're not $1 billion tycoons. And they struggle with exactly what you were just talking about is I need to invest in the technology, but I don't know what the technology is. And then I'm scared of someone's going to hack the technology. Whereas with the paper, I kind of know what's going on. It just seems that it's human evolution. It's the yin and yang. It's all the same story. It's just in a new environment. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and a few years ago, I mean, it's not the sort of mum and pops necessarily only. I mean, Maersk had a huge systems failure about 5 or 7 years ago with the NotPetya virus, and it took down their operations. And at that time, the chief executive or senior executive said that if it hadn't been for all their paper backup systems, and the fact that the shipping industry is quite a long way behind other sectors in terms of digitalization, then the impact of this failures, the cyber attack would have been huge, much, much bigger. It was already huge, but it would have been much, much, much bigger.
And this comes back to that whole thing of efficiencies, technology versus resilience, right? And balances.
Yeah, you absolutely need backup plans. Some of those backup plans will be digital. Some of them will. I mean, the way that the Marks and Spencer's cyber attack worked out was that these hackers used what was called social engineering. So they blagged their way by a third party over the phone saying, "I'm from the retailer. Please, can you give me your, access?" And it worked. And so simple, and something which would have been dealt with by better training. Once they were in, the retailer didn't have a proper backup offline systems, didn't have air gapped systems. And so they had to go back to their pen and paper to log, to track their goods throughout their system. And we are in 2025, just to remind everyone.
Yeah. So speaking of technology, we have to talk about it. Are you seeing artificial intelligence in the supply chain right now? Are there challenges to the workforce or operations? Are there massive benefits? Anything you can shed on the AI transformation that's coming for all of us.
The industry, whether it's trucking, shipping, cargo, warehousing, rail, whatever it is, it's all data driven now. And with the Internet of Things, it is generating terabytes of data. Absolutely, sensors, yeah. And so it's creating more data than humans can deal with. And this is where AI is really coming into play. So there's two areas here. One is that it's having an impact by being able to interrogate the databases better. And to give you an idea on that, it's going to allow transport managers to identify best performing lanes, for example, worst performing lanes, what they've been paying on those lanes, why some of their trucking companies do better than others, why some will charge them more than others, which ones they should be using, and how cost savings can be made. And that's something that humans would really, really struggle with unless you threw a huge, have a really workforce work on it. So that's one of it. And then the other side of it is the predictive element of it, being able to inform decisions for the future rather than looking at the present data. One example, I was talking to a shipping manager just a couple of months ago, and he said at any one time, 50% of his containers were not moving. So they were stuck somewhere. So his big aim in his working day is to speed up those containers. So the information he needs to know is, why are they not moving? Are they in bottlenecks? Are they being routed through ports with more security, or ports which don't have the throughput as the other ports do? Is it the customs issue there? And then it's a case of, well, where should they be going through? What are the best performing ports? How can I reroute them? And using AI to actually deliver that. And if he was able to move that 50% up to 60, but 70% of the containers actually moving rather than stuck in a yard somewhere, then he sees massive gains. But you're right, coming on to the challenges, what we're already seeing is that process-oriented functions are going to be AI'd out, and that is 100% certainty. So people working, for example, in shipping departments who are looking at customs classification codes and trying to work out the duties and tariffs in a very relevant in the world that we're moving into now, their job won't be around. If it's not, hasn't been or got rid of, it will be soon. So that means that for logistics companies, they need to focus on recruiting people who are smarter. They're up the chain. They will be capable of making more informed decisions using AI. Eventually, maybe in 5 years' time, they'll also be AI'd out of the picture. And again, it will be that the transport industry will move to just very, really automated, low labor force model, which obviously is not at the moment. But yeah, in terms of actually making those decisions and feeding the data in to make those decisions, then AI is the future.
Wow.
Yeah, there's literally a lot of moving parts, or not moving 50% of those. That's a stat that kind of blows my mind. When we talk about supply chain resilience, can you give us some examples of businesses where it's working? Like, we hear a lot about the theoretical, and we've heard about breaches, but what works? What's good look like? What's great supply chain look like?
I'll give you a really good example of a recent example. It's from the semiconductor industry. I'll remove the names, but all there's three companies involved, and they're all blue chip, instantly recognizable companies. You would imagine, look from the outside looking in, you'd think, oh, well, they must have, best in class, best practice, in supply chain risk. But one semiconductor supplier factory was hit by lightning. There was a fire. This was in the US, and its production was disrupted. Now, it had two main customers who had very different approaches to supply chain risk. One had taken a very conservative view to risk, so it had built up stocks of inventory, safety stock. Beyond that, though, it had ensured that many of its parts could be sourced from multiple suppliers. And it had designed, specifically from cradle to grave, it has designed its approach around resiliency, which would mean that if one supplier was knocked out, it was able to go to other suppliers, and with an element of redesign into its products, it could keep its production going. Now, to enable this, it had to have a full board buy-in, because there are additional costs involved. As we go right back to the beginning of our conversation, resiliency comes with a cost. There are many good reasons why many customers decide to use one supplier and one supplier only. It may be that it's just completely economies of scale, so you can put in huge orders and they arrive, and it's on a per piece basis, it's very cheap. Or it might be that you want to customize part, and you'll work with a supplier, and that part is solely customized for your own products. But as I was saying, this company took the road that it was going to have a sort of semi-customized, but parts which could be re-engineered, but using the sort of maybe vanilla parts, as it might be called, from a range of different suppliers located in a range of different geographies. And so consequently, when the worst happened, it was able to continue on with its production. Now, this contrasts with the other blue chip company who had taken this other less conservative view on supply chain resiliency. it waited. It hoped that its supplier would be able to get its production back up and running very, very quickly. But unfortunately, in that, it was very disappointed. The disruption went on for weeks. And as a result of that, it had delays to its own production. It has business discontinuity costs, obviously workforce costs as well, and it's lost market share. So the very obvious moral to that is, you have to be conservative. Do not underestimate the disruption probability.
Yeah, I've been in that on my own experience as a sales rep back in the 90s for a technology company that we couldn't get the chips and orders missed the quarter, and it had a domino effect on stock price and everything. So I've lived that firsthand, and it's complicated. It is a web. It is not a linear. It can be linear, but it is a web. What I would like to understand here is if you could give us one piece of advice to supply chain leaders preparing for the future, what would that be?
Reid, it's very simple, is just keep learning. Every day I open up the laptop or whatever, I just love the fact that, I'm going to learn something new, before breakfast or whenever it is. But if you're a supply chain manager or logistic manager, whatever it is, you have to keep scanning the horizon, look what's coming down the road, look at other businesses that not necessarily in the transport logistics industry. In fact, it's better sometimes just to look at other sectors. What's happening in high tech, what's happening in the pharma sector, what are the innovations there, what's disrupting those sectors. And you will look really smart if you are able to go to your boss and say, look, this is what's happening here. We think it could be applied to our business, and this is how we need to go about it. So it's not only good for the business, but it is good for your own career. But you never stop learning. Always challenge the status quo. Never take when people say, well, it's always been done like that, and always keep challenging. So go with your gut instinct.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. A quick little story. And Liz, I don't know if you were there, but I was at one of our global forum where all of our GS1 offices come together. We have these speakers that come in, and Tim Smucker got up, who's, Smucker Brands, one of the brothers, and, family owns. He's kind of in a retired state at this point, but I'm like, wow, this guy is like just so nice, so like good to the industry and everything. And he is, he just truly is. But he was introducing the head of a European hospital organization. And I'm like, what's the connection here? Like, wow, this guy's just so nice. And then it just hit me. When you go in the hospital and you stay overnight, you get toast in the morning and you want to put some jam on it. And so it's these multiple supply chains going to grocery stores, going to restaurants, going to hospitals, going to universities. It's a much different environment. You have to work through all of them, and having some standards and some communication through this, it makes the web more efficient. But I know, Liz, I was looking at the time. We're starting to run out.
Yes.
So
Okay.
We are starting to run out, but we do have 2 questions that we ask all of our guests. I will take the first one. So whether it be in your personal life or your work life, what is the favorite technology that you're using right now?
Okay. Well, I won't get into my personal life because I'm trying to detox from technology. So we put that as one side, but that's another conversation really. And in terms of business, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go back to AI again, because that could be transformative within the market research and consulting businesses as well. We're looking at integrating AI into our market research platforms. And what that will do, it will give our analysts the ability to access the huge amount more knowledge sources and bring that into the format and a context in which they're going to be able to use their skills more to actually look at what will be the outcome, what are the implications, the consequences for the information which they've got hold of. And it will improve the quality of analysis, but it would also be able to, rather than looking at what's happening in a defined number of geographies, it will suddenly say, well, we can, instead of doing 10 geographies, we can do 200, 250. And we can bring that in terms of looking at companies. It means we can go from looking at 100 companies to 500 different companies. And that's really exciting, because the company I run, we're a small consulting company. But that will give us the power to really, instead of having 50 people employed on the floor looking at that stuff, we can use AI, and that gives us the capabilities to really compete against much bigger companies.
Yeah, it truly is transformative. It's unbelievable to experience. We would also like to know, what is something you want to learn in the near future?
What I'd really like to learn more is about the concept, the intersection between every different aspect of supply chain. So looking at the sort of the political side of it, the economic, technological, the societal, the supply chain comes really in the middle of that, which makes it incredibly complicated with all the different forces acting upon it. And I think really we're just starting out on understanding the impact of all these different forces upon the supply chain. And to me, that's absolutely fascinating. And that will probably keep me going for, the next 10 years or so.
Not another 45?
Who knows? Who knows? Advances in technology. I think Putin and Xi were talking about living forever. So,
Never know.
You never know. You never know. But I think that's it's really, really interesting. And I think that to get a handle on all those different aspects, I think then we will see where the supply chain industry is really developing. The old days of supply chain, it's all about economics. It's all about low-cost labor, all about transport costs, all about inventory. That's gone. It's now
completely
massively complicated, sophisticated. And you need an industry that's able to cope with all that.
Yeah. Well, John, we can't thank you enough for spending the time with us today. It was enlightening for me. I love the passion that you have for this. You can really see it. And just wanted to thank you again, and we wish you the best of luck.
Well, great. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I've loved speaking to you both.
Thank you for joining the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1US. If you enjoyed today's show, you can subscribe to our feed or explore more great episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to share and follow us on social media. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.